So if you'll join me in welcoming Peter Merholz.
See, I'm super mic'd up here. Okay, all good. Great. Hello. It's Sydney. Sydney. I am Peter Merholz. I'm going to just get right into it. We're going to start with a brief history lesson. It's 1886. You pick up your latest issue of Scientific American Supplement. It's been delivered into your mailbox. And in that magazine, you see an article that touts a new photographic apparatus, which you see here, a camera that has quite a few elements in order to make it work. Every letter is a different part of it, and in order to operate this camera, you have to figure out how each of these elements works and operates, and you have to do them in the right order in order to be able to take a picture on one of those glass plates in the back. It is roughly the same size as this laptop, if this laptop were kind of a full box, so decent size. And at the time was considered the most practical of systems for the itinerant photographer, which means for that photographer on the go. This was essentially a mobile device in 1886. Around that time, a gentleman invented a different way of capturing images using roll film instead of those plates. That gentleman was George Eastman. And George Eastman had a different idea than this in terms of what the experience of taking pictures should be. His idea was that you press the button and we do the rest. And that was the slogan, the tagline for the Kodak camera. The Kodak camera essentially invented consumer, you would call it electronics, though there was nothing electronic in it, but kind of consumer gadgetry. First this, and then pretty soon after subsequent releases, wide adoption. It was the first kind of object that anybody would have as a consumer technology object. And so it was remarkably successful, and it was successful because as this, oops, I meant to go backwards, sorry. As this tagline suggested, right, he had a vision, and that vision involved a much simpler process. Instead of the 20 stages that you would have to go to before, you pulled the cord, turned the key, pressed the button. That was it. That's all you needed to do to take a picture. And Eastman had an insight, which was that the experience is the product that he was delivering. And that is what I will be talking about today. I'm Peter Merholz. I am based in Oakland, California. I am a design and product executive. I am now I'm now an organization design consultant. As was mentioned a few years ago, I co-wrote a book called Org Design for Design Orgs. I am not a good salesman, or I would have copies of it here. I would have pictures of it in my deck. I know. I would have pictures of it in my deck, with codes of where you can buy it. You can get it at Amazon. That's O'Reilly. So I published through O'Reilly. They've pretty much given up distribution themselves, and they just turned it over to Amazon. You can get it as Amazon. You can get it on Kindle. If you subscribe to O'Reilly Safari, you will have access to it there. Today I am not talking about org design much. It'll be a little bit. But you should buy my book. I still receive royalty checks, which I enjoy. As does Kristen, as does my co-author. You can find me at peterme@peterme.com. You can find me on Twitter at peterme. And then that URL is the URL that we created to support the book, and where we've discussed, since publishing the book 3 years ago, kind of subsequent ideas we've had around org design. Again, not really what we're going to talk about today. So, we've heard a little bit from George Eastman. First the button, or yeah, you push the button, we do the rest. Now we're going to listen to the person who is perhaps the world's greatest product manager. You might think of him as the CEO of Apple, which he was, but if you know anything about how he operated at Apple, he essentially was the chief product officer for the company. And Apple's success, particularly in the modern era, is largely due to his leadership. And he led, as I would hope any product manager would lead. Well, maybe not in some of his interpersonal relationships, it's a separate conversation, but in understanding kind of how to create, how to organize teams, develop, build, and deliver amazing products, right? So he has a quote that I have been turning to for a long time now. It has 3 parts, and it begins like this. When you start looking at a problem, it seems really simple with all these simple solutions. You don't really understand the complexity of the problem. And your solutions are way too oversimplified, and they don't work. I don't know if I will go to the extent that they don't work for what I'm about to say, but what I like about that quote is it maps to a set of stages. This quote will map to a set of stages in the evolution of a product category. And the first stage is the technology stage, where you've simply been able to make something that didn't exist before, and the fact that it exists is interesting enough, right? So you've got, in this case, the Nokia communicator. This was the first mobile device that could connect to the internet anywhere. It's ugly, it's got a small screen, it's probably slow, it's 2-bit, it's any number of shortcomings, but, oh my God, I can connect to the internet anywhere. So it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be sexy, it's enabled a new capability. And that's where these kind of technology categories often begin. And as Samuel Johnson said, it's like a dog walking on his hind legs. It is not done well, but you are surprised to find it is done at all. That is simply, that's good enough. So then going back to Steve, in the second part of the quote, then you get into the problem. You see it's really complicated. You come up with all these convoluted solutions. Sort of the middle, that's where most people stop, and the solutions tend to work for a while. And so instead of talking about technology, we are now in the features stage of kind of product category evolution, right? Where you get an explosion of different attempts at solving that problem, and they're all competing on features. They're trying to cram more and more stuff into them, so they can have more boxes checked on the side. I'm sorry, ticked. I'm in Australia. More boxes ticked on the side of the box that says it does this and it does this and it does this, and because more features is better, right? That's how we compete. We compete on features, right? This is very marketing driven approach. And it does work for a while, but it always ends up leaving people feeling unsatisfied. It's overly complicated. It's hard to use. No one's really excited. I don't know how many here remember this era of smartphones. But they worked and they were fine. And again, they were better than what came before. But it always felt something was missing. That it wasn't delivering on the promise. So we go back to Steve in the third part of the quote. The really great person will keep on going. Steve, I'm sure, thinks of himself as the really great person. And you all can be the really great person, too. But the really great person will keep on going and find the key underlying principle of the problem and come up with a beautiful, elegant solution that works. You all know what is going to be shown next. But this is, again, part of that trajectory of these product categories. You end up in this phase of experience, where competing on features is no longer sufficient. Because often what happens is it gets overwhelming for the customer. If you remember Word, when the ribbon just kept going and going and going, and it had and you just couldn't use it anymore. Or VCRs that had 1,000 different features and jog dials and program settings, but then all anybody did was they took a videotape, they put it in, they hit play, and they walked away. So this features will end up playing out, and often you get this new arrival that embodies experience. So in this case, iPhone. at the time, iPhone was feature poor compared to its competition. It wasn't 3G, it was 2.5G. It was on the Edge network. Oh my God, ugh. Its camera wasn't very good. It didn't have a keyboard. Those BlackBerry people need, road warriors need keyboards to type on. You couldn't expand the apps. You couldn't load any apps on it. So it was considered by the kind of many of the technology critics and technology wonks as not as good as these others because it wasn't delivering on features, but clearly it was better in some way because it became the template from which all other smartphones have evolved. Right, and so he, or this phone, and this idea is like capturing that there's something meaningful and powerful in delivering a superior experience, greater or different than simply the sum of those parts. And it's not just phones. You see this over and over again. I've done this in the past, showing word processors evolving through this type of phase. Group communication has recently, we've seen examples of this recently. IRC, the tool of nerds in university labs and engineers in certain organizations. But then you have a number of different attempts at creating group communication tools. This is IBM SameTime, Atlassian's HipChat, acquired HipChat, etc. But now the predominant tool is Slack. Similarly to the iPhone, Slack was feature poor when it came out. It only really supported small groups. It wasn't enterprise scale. It didn't have many of the bells and whistles that people wanted or expected from these types of tools. But its experience was so delightful. It just wove itself into your work life so easily that people would ignore their IT department's restrictions and figure out a way to bring it in and use it because it was a better tool than anything that their IT department was giving them access to. So this is a pattern that you see again and again in the evolution of kind of technical product categories. And I was looking at this, and I was thinking about, I was invited to speak at a product conference, not the one last week, but a couple years ago. I was like, this is similar to a thing that product managers talk about. You ever read product management articles on Medium or wherever you go get your product management stuff? You are bound to see what I'm about to show you. So experience, technology, and features maps to the sacred triad of UX, tech, and business, at which in the center lives product management. You will go to any product management conference. We saw this last week. Multiple speakers using these three circles. It has become kind of the standard argot in product management to talk about themselves. We live at the center of UX, tech, and business. In theory. In my experience with product management, in reality, sure, technology, important, nice big circle there. Business, huge circle for business. UX, not so much. And in fact, product management reality is primarily concerned with the intersection of business and technology and treats kind of UX, customers, whatever, almost as an afterthought. And what I would argue, so I come from a design background, not as I wasn't trained as a designer, I'm an anthropology major, but I won't get into my career history. We can talk about that in the Q&A or over cider, I believe. Oh, did I spill the beans? But I've been working in design for quite a while and realized that designers, because we're an empathetic sort, recognize the flaw in focusing on tech and business. We kept being asked to build things that we knew no one would want to use. We didn't have to study that we knew no one would want to use it because we're designers and we're empathetic. We kind of understand that people use the stuff we make. But we were like, this just makes no sense. Why are you asking us to build this thing that we know no one's going to use. And they're like, shut up and design. And so many designers ended up having to essentially create this field of user experience to accommodate, to account for this neglected duty on behalf of product management. Product management had forsaken a key part of their mandate, and no one was there filling the void. So a bunch of designers are like, well, we'll do it. We'll call it user experience. We'll come up with a lot of practices and processes that externalize and make manifest what we know to be true already, so that we can have an argument, so that we can stand up and push back on bad technology or business ideas, or hopefully just advance all of this, identify new opportunities. So a few years ago, wearing this shirt, branding, personal branding matters. I tried to define the profession of UX designer. This is a crowd that I think will appreciate this even more than one at the product conference, because you're all a bunch of designers. I think they got it, but I'm speaking to my tribe, I feel, here at IxDA Sydney. So I tried to define the profession of UX designer. And what I was reacting to was perhaps a common notion that UX design is all of these things. UX design is information architecture and industrial design and human factors and interaction design and human-computer interaction, visual design. The UX design is this umbrella that contains all of those things. And I would argue UX design isn't all of those things. Those things are those things. Interaction design is interaction design. Visual design is visual design. These are crafts, these are disciplines that have their own legacy and background and understanding and ways of working. And it's not right. It's inappropriate to say UX design is all of those things. Those things are those things. Let them be those things. So I have a contention that most people who call themselves UX designers aren't, because there is no such thing as UX design, because UX design is mostly interaction design, occasionally with information architecture, human-computer interaction. But no one can give me, I can't find a clear, simple definition of UX design that is convincing. I've been looking for 25 years. And so this was me trying to define. UX design isn't those things. Well, what is it? And I saw, UX design is what's left. UX design is a function that brings together those practices into a greater whole. So what would a UX designer do? I think it's important, right? If you're in a profession, you have a set of activities that you're responsible for. So what is it you do as a UX designer? And I reflected on my time in Adaptive Path and the things we did under the rubric of user experience design or user experience strategy. And so I came together with this list that I'll show you, right? User experience designers, they generate user insights, right? UX researchers might be doing the research. Maybe you're working with them, but you're working to figure out what to make of that information. And this is a customer journey, right? So we're generating user insights. UX designers make business cases for design. This is something we did for a financial services client. We had this model where design affects behavior. And so we were able to connect behavior with the financial outcome. And we would occasionally work with clients and run them through models like this to help validate the work we're about to do, their investment in design, because it will actually be a return on investment as opposed to simply a cost of doing business. UX designer will focus efforts where you can have impact. This is from a workshop we used to teach, but we did this type of work for clients. You have on one axis viability and feasibility. How much impact can we have? And you have another importance. How important is this to the business? We've shortened this to, over time, we call this essentially bang for buck. Whatever and others have adopted it or adapted it in other ways, but a way to make rational decisions about where you're going to focus your design effort. There's always too much to do. for your design capacity. So you want to focus your design effort on what matters. So we would do that. Facilitate cross-functional ideation, right? Get everybody in a room, give them their stickies, their whiteboard markers, get them drawing and doing stuff. Call it design thinking, call it Google Design Sprints now. Get those ideas out of all these people and put them out in front of the group to then talk about and reflect on, right? So that's something I think a UX designer can do. And then coming out of that and other practices, generate a ton of concepts, right? UX designers, they're not the ones literally drawing all these concepts, but through those exercises, them and their team coming up with a lot of ideas, right? For whatever the problems they're trying to solve. Whittling down those concepts and then identifying the winners and then coming up with essentially an experience plan. I'm trying to remember how this one builds. Experience plan. So this was one for, this is actually technically after Adaptive Path for the company I work for in the Ancestry.com like space, family trees, genealogy space. And this was a plan for how we were going to evolve the experience over time. And we were very interested in telling stories, making sure that each kind of release had a theme and a story, and that we understood the value to the user, value to the business, and what would enable that to be real. This is not dissimilar from, if you're familiar with the kind of Spotify skateboard to car model, right? You go from skateboard to bicycle to, or skateboard to scooter to bicycle to motorcycle to car, as opposed to going component, like building a car slowly over time. You want to make something that people will use day one. A UX designer would articulate an experience, strategy, and vision. It might be shown as a concept image or concept video. This was a concept of a set of photos. There might be models of how ecosystems are interacting with each other. This is an attempt to identify kind of a smart commerce model. Might be physical prototypes. That's a prototype of a pill bottle design that turned into, I don't know, I think you guys have Target here, but Target in the US turned that into their pharmacy pill bottle. Or it could just be experience principles. Like what are the things that we're upholding as a team? Do more with less, authentically digital. This comes from Microsoft, I think Windows 10. I think that's Windows 10 or Windows 7. So articulating an experience strategy and vision, something that catalyzes the team, helps them understand like where the North Star is, what is the direction we're going to go in. That's something a UX designer can do. And then as the work evolves over time, ongoing oversight and orchestration. And I like this model. This is an organizational model from the Walt Disney Studios. I like it because it's globular, it's circular, it's kind of weird. And if you zoom in, you kind of get the core functions of directors, and then camera, cinematography, editing, cutting, sound, music, right? And the director oversees these roles. And so I was like, I think it's kind of like, a UX designer would be coordinating, again, if you remember that coordination function, coordinating the efforts of these kinds of designers in the delivery of that kind of experience that you want. So I finished my talk. I don't know if you've all forgotten, but this was all slides from a talk I gave about what is a UX designer. So I finished my talk. I've gone through these slides, and in the audience, you might know of her as Christina Woodkey. Christina Woodkey's an old hand UX person. She's since written books on OKRs, sketching. She's a thought leader in the space that we're all in. And in the audience, Christina Woodkey raises her hand and says, wait a minute, isn't that just product management? I went, no. She's like, I think that's product management. I went, no, I've never met a product manager who did any of those things. You can't tell me that's called product management if literally every product manager I've ever spoken with has not done any of those. So when I left Adaptive Path and I went in-house, because that talk I gave was a few years after leaving Adaptive Path. What I would see is teams start with some initial insight. We're going to do blah. Somebody has an idea. And then they figure out there's a plan of what it needs to do, and then they kind of march towards building and shipping it. Whatever that initial idea was, and then they analyze it, and then they look around and ask themselves, wait a moment, what were we trying to achieve? We got so focused on just shipping a thing that was a feature on somebody's list that we didn't actually bother to understand what outcome were we trying to drive towards beyond ship the thing. And then some teams would do a little bit more. Some savvier teams would, after the plan, they would try stuff. They would prototype, sketch options, test those prototypes, and then use that to kind of refine what they were doing before they shipped it. When I went in-house, I was shocked. No strategic thinking, no authentic understanding of users, no kind of alignment between what we're doing and a larger set of business goals that we're trying to drive towards. So at this company I work for, I had for the only time in my career, still, an office. The door that closed. And I had a giant whiteboard, like basically as big as this, maybe even a little wider, in my office. And on that whiteboard, I drew the double diamond diagram, and I filled it with stickies that explained kind of steps along the way. What are the activities that you would do? I had never used the double diamond before. I had been familiar with it, but I had never used it before because at Adaptive Path, we didn't need that to understand how to do our work. But I realized it was a helpful tool to communicate to non-designers kind of how I want to approach the work we're doing. This is my frame of reference. This is what I'm trying to get done. Right? Remember, I'm working with product folks who aren't necessarily behaving in this way, so I'm trying to communicate, here are the things I think we need to do. And I'm guessing many of you are familiar with the double diamond, but you have definition on one side, strategy and plan, building the right thing, execution on the other side, working through trade-offs to deliver an optimal solution, trying to build the thing right. The most important thing about the double diamond, pause for dramatic emphasis. The most important thing about the double diamond is its shape and what it communicates about divergence and convergence. Literally, you can throw away everything else about it. It's there to remind you to not take that initial idea and try to ram it through to the end, because almost never, 99.9% of the time, your first idea is not the best idea. But to explore, to play, to diverge, to have a diversity of perspectives brought to bear, to do that concept generation, to give yourself options from which you choose a direction to head, and then do that again as you're solving that problem from which to figure out the specific solution. That is the most important thing about the double diamond. And in definition, the role of design is to help make strategy concrete. Strategy is by its nature an abstract function. There's no there, really, in strategy. But designers can help make it concrete. They can paint a picture of what the implications of that strategy are. We can build prototypes and we can build concept imagery, illustration, storyboards, whatever it is, and help people understand the implications of the strategy that they're discussing before it goes into an execution phase. Too often you don't see design involved in that first time. And then people don't understand the implications of the strategy until they're starting to build it. And they're like, wait, that's not what I meant. And you have to now rewind it. And then the second diamond is where most design still lives as it should, and what everyone tends to think of design. Design in the effort of supporting delightful, engaging experiences. So having reflected on what Christina said to me in that talk, literally in a room of 400 people, I'm being challenged about this, right? So bring it. You can't scare me. I had Christina Wicke yell at me. There's no way you can scare me. I thought back to this picture and realized something that hadn't occurred to me before. So the stickies were color-coded. Yellow for UX, orange for product, and pink for UX and product. Blue were just a set of stages, right? Like the initial idea you see there and some activities you could do. And what I realized is that, yes, there's a number of yellow stickies, though many of them are things like brand development, right? There's not a whole lot that is only done by the UX team. Most of the stickies, more than others, are these pink ones, which is UX. I realized later on, not at the time, years later, looking back at this, that what I had done is I hadn't understood it, but what I had somewhere in my subconscious realized is that the double diamond isn't a diagram of good design practice. It's actually a diagram of good product management practice. And which product managers often don't think of their work as a practice. That's starting to change. At the Web Directions conference last week, that was a theme that actually came up, is that product managers have to think more about the craft of their work and what is it that they do. That's frankly, that's new to that industry. So if you're having trouble interacting with your product manager, it might be because they don't know what they're supposed to do. Like literally do what activities beyond hanging out in Jira and moving cards around. Props to Atlassian. They're like, what is my job? I mean, if I just quote tweeted something from John Cutler, who's a product management guy, very active on Twitter, great guy, brilliant guy. And he has this recent post of the 15 things product managers are dealing with because they don't know what they're doing. And not because of ignorance, but because they come from different backgrounds. There's a whole lot of stuff going into product management right now. There's a huge lack of clarity in that discipline. Anyway, I thought, oh, this is almost, yes, it's about design, but it's more interestingly about product management, how product development, frankly, should operate. And we're starting to see a recognition of this. So this is a diagram by Jeff Patton, probably most famous for his user story mapping work, but he's been an agile and design guy and guru for decades now. And he talks about dual track development. And in dual track development, you have discovery, where you go out and try to understand what it is you should build, and development, the building of it. And it maps almost perfectly to the two diamonds. And it's essentially created as a response to the fact that straightforward Scrum style, 2-week sprint, agile development does not allow you to do good design. This is a hack because this doesn't support design, nor was it ever intended to. But a lot of companies were like, design, you got to do your design in 2 weeks. You got to do everything, you got to figure it out in 2 weeks. And so you're seeing more and more product gurus, Marty Kagan and Melissa Perry and others, are helping the product management community understand, no, you can't just build stuff and hope for the best. You got to think about it first and developing an approach for thinking about it. Funny thing about that approach that now many product managers are starting to embrace, I'm doing discovery. I'm taking Teresa Torres' workshop. I'm listening to my podcast with Jeff Gothelf and Jeff Patton and other white dudes named Jeff. I'm a good product manager. I'm doing discovery. Literally everything they are doing, we were doing as UX designers 15 years ago. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. I'm not also saying that to pat ourselves on the back. I'm just saying to recognize that this is connected. Going back to our friend George. Key to his insight and key to why I think we're moving in this direction and recognizing the importance of things like discovery, that we can't just shift. Key to his insight was the second part of the phrase. So the first part of the phrase, you press the button. We're going to make it dead freaking, try not to swear too much, simple. You press a button, because we, Kodak, are going to take on the very difficult work of developing, processing, printing your photos. That's hard work. That before, with that itinerant photographer thing, those were hobbyists who did all that stuff themselves. I'm sure they could pay someone a lot of money to do that for them, but essentially that was before the codec, it was a hobbyist, it was a geek endeavor. It was like ham radio. You had to be a geeky technologist to even want to think about taking pictures. And with the codec camera, anyone could take pictures because they were going to do the hard part. They had their offices in Rochester, New York that you would send your film to, or send your whole camera to, sorry. They would take the film, they would develop, process, print it, refill it, and send that back to you. They had essentially realized that in order to deliver a great experience, they had to turn themselves into a service. They were no longer a product. They were a service. This is an image of a dying activity, buying a car. People still do it. It's slowly declining. But it is, we all know it's going away. But maybe not totally. Some people are going to want cars. But a lot of people are going to be fine. It's going away because everything is becoming a service. Right? We have car share. Walk up to a car, get in it, go somewhere, bring it back. We have people at the push of a button appearing. We get in that car, we get dropped off. We didn't have to do anything. As a traveler, right, I'm here in Australia, that I don't have to know how to navigate your streets is awesome, right? I'm not going to even rent a car. We have services. This is one that I love in the Bay Area called Gig. Gig is a service. You might have something like that here, where there are cars scattered around the streets of Berkeley and Oakland. You have an app. You reserve a car. You unlock it. You walk up to it. You unlock it. You drive it around. You can park it anywhere in what's called the home zone throughout Berkeley and Oakland and leave it. Because of this reality, my family, which in the United States, husband, wife, 2 kids, would normally be at least a 2-car household, if not 3 or more. But all of our neighbors, all of our friends, our kids' schools, et cetera, they're 2-car households. We're a 1-car household. Because it doesn't make sense for us to have another car, because when we need another car, we just get it this way. It makes sense for us to have the 1 car. It doesn't make sense for us to have the 1 car. But it does make sense for us to spend another $30,000 on another car that we would use almost never, when we have access to automobility at our fingertips. Right? So if everything is becoming a service, and there's an implication of that around the nature of the service relationship. So this is an experience map from an adaptive path project for Rail Europe. It's become kind of emblematic of service design. And I'm bringing it up because it shows that if you want to travel and use this service to help you travel, right? There's research and planning, shopping, booking, post-booking, travel, post-travel, and there's this vast, involved, omni-channel experience that you're going through, where the distinction between a product, a feature, marketing falls away on the part of the user, on the part of the customer. Not usually on the part of the business, which is an issue, right? Customer, you have the marketing folks who are trying to attract and acquire folks, and then they somehow throw you over to the product people who throw you over to the customer service people, right? Internally, those things are disjointed, but as a customer, that should all just hang together. Because what you're developing, if everything is becoming a service, what matters at the heart of the service is the relationship between the customer and the company. There's not that product that you bought, and that's where the value is. The value is in the service relationship. And in a relationship, I'm sure many of you have been in relationships with romantic or platonic or otherwise, work relationships, etc. In a relationship, it's not just about the components, the interaction points of the relationship. What's going on inside, right? And the thinking and feeling, right? That's what I'm zooming in on here. That is all that the customers have to consider with respect to this experience now. How am I thinking about it? How is it making me feel? Is it delivering value? But also, I'm stressed because traveling in another country is a little stress. I don't speak the language, whatever it is. I feel vulnerable being alone in the middle of the night. Trying to return a ticket I'm not able to use, whatever it is, right? This is all emotional valence. what we're delivering are these, we are delivering experiences that incite emotions. We have to be respectful and recognize these emotions. We can't ignore them. That is key to what our customers are receiving from us. Not just, did I accomplish task X? And so if what you're trying to design for and deliver for is a service experience, that raises another set of issues I wanted to introduce. I'm almost not done. I'm still introducing topics. Sorry. This is the org design part of the talk, by the way. So instead of organizing your design by products, right? Many of you working in digital contexts are probably working in some type of squad model where you've got a designer and a developer and a set of engineers, and they are working on a product like this, or maybe you have a few squads rolling up to products like this. So this is, say, for an e-commerce site, a generic e-commerce site. I've worked in e-commerce a little bit. So you have search and browse, product page, et cetera, et cetera. And it is tempting to organize design the way these products are organized, which is you have a designer in here, a designer in there, a designer in there, a designer in there, et cetera. Instead, consider organizing your design teams by customers and the journeys that they have. So in this model, we have a marketplace, an e-commerce marketplace. I worked at Groupon, merchants and customers. I've worked with OpenTable. You have diners and restaurants. I worked at a job board where you have job seekers and employers, right? So I like marketplaces. But it's a handy model. And so instead of thinking about designing for a set of features, you design for that buyer experience, and you have a team that is delivering on that experience end to end, and those product teams, those features, are kind of waypoints in that end-to-end experience that you're delivering. But that team is focused on how do we deliver a great buyer experience, or you have another team that's trying to think about how do we deliver a great seller experience. So organizing your teams by audiences and the journeys they are on, not by a set of products, right? And it would be typical in many modes. If you had a growth team, even if it touched both sides of the marketplace, the same designer would be working on, or the same designer working on reviews, either helping shoppers place reviews or merchants respond to reviews, that kind of thing. But when you have your designers only focused on a part of the experience, they're now not cognizant of that journey that those people are on, and it creates this fractured experience. So instead, organize your teams to deliver an end-to-end experience. They started talking about this type of stuff years ago and trying to organize by customers. And then about a year or two into kind of public presentations that I was giving, a newsletter came out by this gentleman, Ken Norton. Ken Norton is the product management guru for GV, aka Google Ventures. Super smart guy, someone worth listening to. And he had this newsletter, and it ended up being in 2 parts, called Don't Ship the Org Chart. And in it, he has this quote, organize your product managers around customers, not code repositories. Connect PM areas of ownership to users and their experiences. Maybe you have a buyer PM and a seller PM instead of back-end and front-end PMs. And he got a response from Noah Weiss, who was another product leader, but talking about the engineering implications. Just like it's ideal to organize your PM team around customers and their use cases, the same goes for engineering. Otherwise, you risk having a PM having to work with a half dozen engineering teams to ship a single feature. And after I got over the fact that these folks seemed to be copying what I was trying to sell, I reflected on, because I don't think he'd seen any of my stuff, right? I think this was an independent kind of understanding and awareness. Made me realize that we're all kind of responding to what is happening in the market around the shift to everything being a service, and at the heart of the service is that customer relationship. And any organization design decision is a trade-off. So earlier, we were making organization design decisions based typically on code bases, because that allowed engineering to go faster. And that was the primary goal. How do I make more shit faster? And what we're seeing here, and what I was feeling with design, is a recognition that maybe it's okay if engineering goes a little slower if what we're doing is making sure that the customer experience is the best it can be. Because that's what matters more than any other single thing. Getting back to the little UX, and one of the key problems that I see with it when we think about it in light of these service experiences and the emotional valence that we are now responsible for, right? Whether or not we signed up to engage with people who are feeling stressed or anxious or vulnerable, those are likely your users in some contexts. And so we have a duty, we have a responsibility. And one of the issues that occurs when product management is unbalanced is how the people primarily responsible for making decisions, prioritizing what is it we're going to do, how they approach that problem solving. I'm going to use a kind of cliched version of left brain, right brain. I know it's not neuroscientifically accurate. Please do not at me about that. It's still, I think, a helpful model for thinking about these aspects. And the issue I see is that with technology and business, they have a very similar way of tackling and solving problems. It is analytical, reductive, rigorous, very detail-oriented, bottom-up, evaluative, quantitative. There's nothing wrong with that, but that is insufficient when trying to solve problems, particularly problems that have that kind of service, relationship, emotional experience that are part of them, which is now every problem, right? And the reason you want UX and design to be equivalent is because of the different way of tackling problems and thinking about these things. UX and design is going to be more emotionally aware. It's going to be additive as opposed to reductive. It's going to be intuitive. It's going to have insights that might not be one might not be able to articulate the rationale behind, and that's okay. It tends to be top down, very big picture, very grandiose, generative, right? It's about making creativity, means in qualitative as opposed to quantitative. Again, I'm not saying only do the stuff on the right and screw the stuff on the left, because then you're going to get a lot of weird shit that no one would actually be able to use. But you want these things in balance. Part of the reason, though, I think that tech and business has been dominant isn't simply because we're building stuff that's engineering and business has the purse strings because they're all MBAs or whatever. I think part of it's been dominant because the stuff on the right is harder to do right. Stuff on the left is, by its very nature, is eminently solvable. Stuff on the right, you don't know where you're going. That's kind of the point. It's a journey, and that makes leaders really uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable. But it's key to delivering greatness. Steve Jobs famously went to read some hippie college in Oregon and studied Japanese calligraphy, and that's why the Mac has fonts. He hired Susan Kerr, a fine artist, to be the icon designer and initial font designer for the Mac. He realized that Johnny Ive was vastly underutilized as an industrial design wizard within Apple design. And one of the last talks he gave before he died, he talked about the reason that Apple was successful was because it existed at this intersection of technology and liberal arts. I love the phrase liberal arts. It doesn't say design, liberal arts. And that speaks to me because as someone with an anthropology background and not a design background, I like to think even more broadly than just design towards that kind of broader set of humanities. And the role that mindset, that frame, has to play in building great products, right? Whether it was the Mac or the iPhone, as I was alluding to before, they were created because of an awareness of that intersection. And so, given that, right, we need product management. We need that UX bubble. But it's not UX. Because I think that bubble is design. Maybe it's liberal arts. It's probably design. Maybe content. Because I think if I've hopefully gotten across anything, that intersection is where UX is. UX is the sum of all of that. Design contributes to it. It's also where a product is, right? Because the experience is the product that we have to deliver and all that our customers, users, audience cares about. Thank you.
Sorry? Oh, what is yours? Thank you, Peter. I have microphones. Look, let me give him one.
This is the Q&A portion, I believe.
And I have another microphone. Yes, can I get you a beer?
I'm good right now, thank you.
Okay.
Mic's not working.
That one's not working. Oh, now it is.
Now it is.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. I like how at the end we also had orange in lines, whereas previously at the beginning it was blue. See, I noticed these things. I'm sure there's questions. I don't see any hands. I see one.
We have hands, and if we can talk about this, we can talk about orgs, we can talk about, I've talked to design leaders throughout Sydney for the last few days, from startups to big companies and in-house and agencies, so ask away. I'm willing to blather on about whatever, and we'll see where it goes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for this. It was very, very interesting. I'm really curious about the reaction of the product when you showed the last slide.
When I show, oops.
In an audience of product managers, how did they react to this?
Product managers like this because I think they in part recognize that they haven't been fulfilling their mission, especially when I've given this talk at conferences. It's usually conferences. Right now it's been a couple of product conferences run by product people who were former UX designers. And so the Mind the Product conference that Martin Erickson and others run, it's based out of London, and then the Web Directions product conference. There's a lot of design imbued into that, into the program already. So it's not totally out of left field. I also think they like it because it gives them I think it helps them understand, again, something they've been missing, and gives them a bit of an allowance to engage more directly in UX. I think a lot of product people are almost afraid of it. That's why they have someone else do it. That's not what they do. And this is kind of an invitation. Come, grow that, figure that out, understand it, engage with it. That is part of your job. It's okay. And I haven't seen a lot of resistance, frankly. I was waiting for that at this first product night. There was 1,000 people in a symphony hall in San Francisco that I was saying this to. And afterwards, all any product person would say is, right on. I'm like, if you all agree with me, why aren't you doing it? And that was which I never got an answer to. See here, you have a hand, and then back there.
I don't know if it's probably a very poorly crafted question, maybe a little bit of an observation, but product managers are quite closely shackled to an asset or product which has KPIs associated with it. Potentially it might be, from a mindset point of view, quite difficult for them to be unencumbered and go kind of quite early up that strategic UX spectrum to really think, is the product an answer? Is my product actually rubbish? Should I bin it? You know, really having that kind of open mindset to that. What's your advice or guidance when you kind of encounter that? Or is it about breaking down the current thinking and really reimagining?
So yes to what you're saying. I've seen that. People will gravitate to where they are comfortable. And I think a lot of product people are comfortable in the details of moving cards around or other kind of specifics of product management, and are not comfortable with some of these more generative, creative, talking to customers, developing insight stuff. And so I think it's not simply a matter of KPIs, et cetera, it's a matter of personal comfort, right? There's a lack of willingness or interest in growing that part. So that becomes kind of a leadership challenge of how does product leadership and maybe design and product leadership create a space where these folks are encouraged they're measured on it. Their performance review is in part somehow connected with how many customers have you talked to, but not just that, like how many concepts did you throw away or something, right? Like I've been talking with friends, including while I've been here in Sydney, including Lisa Reichelt, who runs user research at Atlassian, and she just talks. One of the things that she and I ended up talking about is the power of incentives for whoever it is in the organization, right? It's very easy for a product manager to poo-poo research if it somehow conflicts with what they think their incentives are, whether it's shipping on time or which is often what it is. Too often we have product people that are in what John Cutler calls feature factories, and we're not actually interested in their outcome, just that they continue to output. And so it's shifting away from that model, focusing on outcomes, focusing on value delivery. And the way to understand that you are going to deliver value is to step back and reflect or broaden your aperture before narrowing in on the problem to solve. And that often requires escalating up within an organization to make sure that the leadership is behind it. Because often some product leadership is, some isn't. You get the leadership behind it. The leadership's not behind it, the team won't do it. You're just yelling at a brick wall then. But if you can get the leadership behind it and then develop ways to, the other thing I saw a lot is you need to protect time. Product managers are often find themselves in kind of drill situations and firefighting situations. There's bugs that got to be fixed or whatever, and those always feel more urgent and more immediate, and they often are. But you can very easily fall in this trap that all you're doing is putting out fires and not planning ahead. And that becomes another leadership challenge, I think, of protecting time. It might only be 20%, 25%, but you say, you know what, 25% of every sprint or some period of time, I as a leader expect you to engage in discovery and not just, and I, the leader, am willing to let things be broken longer so that you have the time to be strategic. So it's that kind of dialogue that we need to have and continue to have if we want to break out of this kind of hamster wheel that we find ourselves of just kind of shipping mediocre stuff and moving on.
Over here.
Yeah, no, and there's if we could get at the woman in the back there.
Love the talk. I love this line of thinking. I've been following your writing for quite some years. You've been going on about this for quite a while, which is great because it's consistently in the right direction. If you've got these three facets, if you like, design, tech, product, what's going to happen in the future? Are we going to see designers adopting more PM skills and the role of PM being redundant, or vice versa? Or what's the makeup of the team look like in the future? I'm of the view that something has to change because the friction that's there in that triad at the moment really is not sustainable. And you're like, if you think about your stages, we're at that feature stage.
Yep.
We've got all the right features in the team.
Yep.
We don't have great experience.
Yep. I think that's exactly right.
Where's it going?
I want a whiteboard, draw, but I'll paint a word picture and move my hands around a lot. This was a conversation. So I had the fortune of it was only half an hour, but sitting down with Jürgen Spengel, the head of design at Atlassian today. He and I had spoken on the phone, but had never met. So I said, "Hey, I'm in town. Can we meet?" And this was actually one of the biggest challenges that he said his teams are facing is that relationship between product and design. It's so blurred, it's so confused. Partly that's because, as I referred to earlier, product hasn't defined its own craft. Like what does it do? Product is different in every company. The product manager moves company to company and has to learn a whole new way of working. Designers move company to company, and we kind of can fit almost anywhere, right? And so there's a need for the world of product management to kind of do a better job of articulating its craft, and I think its craft does involve, if I go back, show navigator. Sorry, isn't this exciting? Doing more of these things, and we're starting to see this at the product conference. Product manager from Atlassian, Sharif, talked about a design the box exercise, which is an exercise we used to do it at the past 15 years ago with clients to get them to think smarter about what it is that what they want to build. And he's now embracing this as a product leader within Atlassian in terms of engendering a similar conversation. And that kind of gets to where I think this is going. There's going to be a part of UX design that I think will become product management. This isn't all design though, right? There's other types of design work. And again, the interaction design and the visual design and information design and a bunch of other more craft disciplines that I think will remain as design disciplines. And these tools that had been known as UX design, because there was nowhere else to put them, are actually going to become product management. A realization I had was that 15 years ago, Adaptive Path was doing product management. We just didn't have the language for it. We didn't know that's what we were doing. Our clients didn't know that's what we were doing, because our clients were often marketing departments who didn't understand product, and that's why they were turning to someone for help. Or like IT departments who didn't have a product function. All right, but they knew they had to deliver something of value, and so they were like, they found us. And we came up with a lot of these approaches to address this gap in understanding what it is we should be building, first Diamond stuff. And again, we called it user experience, sometimes user experience design, user experience strategy. Now I'm like, oh, we were essentially articulating a part of product management. We just didn't know it. So I think you're going to see product managers embrace more of these tools. The other thing I think we're going to probably see is we need to move away from one product manager, one designer on these teams, because there's more that needs to be done than an individual can do. This is something that came up at the product conference. I think we're going to see teams of product managers. It might only be a couple, but sharing responsibilities so that not one person is expected to be this superhero who can do everything. I mean, if you read this article by John Cutler, you would wonder why anyone would do the work, because it's set up to fail. The only reason I think many people do the work is they get power. I mean, it's the job that gets power. They get to make the decision. So I think as part of that direction, you're going to see different types of product managers arise. You're going to see more analytical ones. You're going to see more product-y, kind of design-sensitive ones, leadership or strategy ones, figuring out ways to work together. In the same way that we see different kinds of designers working together. And I think we're going to start seeing some of these design activities, or activities that we historically associate with design, get pulled into a type of product manager that's going to be a bit more strategic and a bit more setting the direction of the product, and less about backlogs and burn downs and Jira tickets and all that stuff. That will still happen, but we're going to, I hope, decouple these roles.
Hi, you spoke about shifting away from feature-focused squads to more user-focused squads. I guess I was just wondering, you mentioned that you were speaking to kind of startups all the way to bigger companies. Is there any companies that is doing that shift quite well, or are they still kind of in the discussion phase of it?
Probably not. Companies are trying. I don't know how well they're doing because I don't have enough insight. One that does come to mind, and I know they're trying to move in this direction, is Zendesk. A friend of mine that runs design there. I'm all super. Sorry, find a place to stand. Oh no, that's even worse. This is exciting. Maybe if I stand. Oh, now I'll just speak loudly then. Hopefully the video can get it. Zendesk has been moving into this model. No, there we go. Moving into this model where they serve customer service agents. They serve like different people, and they're trying to organize more around those different audience types and what it is they're doing. The challenge that they're having in trying to do that is that they now have teams across multiple continents, because multiple continents were responsible for different parts of that same customer experience. So it's introducing a new challenge.
So I'll just rock this mic. But no, I'm seeing some design teams try to embrace this, right? Most marketplaces have design teams operating. When I was at Open Table, they had a restaurant design team and a diner design team. And so design teams, I think, are more likely to do this. Where I'm standing? Can I just turn this off? Let's try a different mic. No, it's still going to happen, but we'll make it work. Kind of eerie. Maybe it's like ghosts or something trying to communicate with us. Well, this is for this video mic that shouldn't be affecting us. Isn't this great content video people in the future? So they can edit all this out. And in fact, I think it's editing it out. That has like onboard AI that's probably taking this out right now. So I think again we are seeing design teams getting this, whether or not the product teams are. I think we're starting to see product teams do it. I don't know if Ken, after having written this, has been working. I would assume the portfolios the products, the companies that are in GV's portfolio that he's working with, he's encouraging it. I can't say I've seen it at scale. One exception comes to mind-ish, at least, definitely on the design side, is Airbnb. Some of this has been influenced by, some of my thinking has been influenced by Airbnb, because they have teams dedicated to the guest experience and the host experience and have for a long time. And it's kind of matrix. They have teams dedicated to those experiences, and then they do have teams that are kind of vertical, specific to different parts of the journey, different parts of the different product areas. Finding a place, or when you show up, when you arrive, et cetera, et cetera. And so, there are companies that are trying to do it. I'm not familiar with a lot of organizations or kind of enough of a range of case studies of good, better, best to be able to reflect on that. Who has a mic? You have a mic. You have the power. No. No.
Hello? My turn. Okay. Again, I'm not sure if I'm going to phrase this terribly well, but it feels like an elephant in the room, not in the room, is perhaps the project manager. And that's
Okay.
in that a lot of times it seems to me that product managers can get either drawn into, pushed into, or attracted to the day-to-day managing, as you say, pushing teams through, managing the team, either because there's not someone there to support them, or because it's the more concrete thing that feels.
I am doing a thing. Progress is made. Yes.
And again, maybe this is more observation, but it seems to me that when we're talking about product management, product manager, and UX, that really we're talking on the same spectrum, and it's really maybe a degree of the level of detail that one goes into. So product perhaps more strategic, UX design a little bit more to execution. What do you think about that sort of?
So you threw a few things at me. Project management, I think that might become kind of almost an associate product manager role when I talk about product managers starting to work in teams. You maybe have a junior person who is more on that role, and they're just kind of learning what this thing is, and someone needs to do that stuff. And they might be as well suited as anybody. Though what I've also heard is that in really successful kind of squad type models, your engineering leads are often better at doing the Jira management than anyone in product. I guess I want to push back on product management to UX design being more strategic to more detailed. It ends up being how you define UX design. So now the snake is eating its tail. But because I see UX design, in fact, that talk where I laid this out was originally titled UX is strategy, not design. And so the UX part of that design might be now done by product managers as a more strategic initiative. And that's why I would lock off the letters UX and refer to design as kind of appeared to engineering as this kind of craft discipline that's about making. Not about strategizing anymore, but about how are we going to, given this strategy, how are we going to solve that problem? And that doesn't mean that designers and engineers can't inform the strategy, but they're not responsible for it, right? That PM role is still the one primarily responsible for it. And they're responsible for executing quality against that strategy, right? Did you get the mic, or do you? Yeah.
I'm good at mine.
And it works!
What's up? So one of the things about design thinking is that it democratizes design, and anyone can be a designer. Can anyone be a product manager?
Okay, so no. There's a swirl of thoughts around everything that you said, and I'm trying not to just babble. I think anyone can become a product manager. Particularly once product management figures out kind of the essence of what it is as a craft, then that becomes a set of skills that you can practice and deliver on. Whether you come from a design background, an engineering background, a business background, a marketing background, whatever background, right? You can evolve or develop those product management skills. Now, what we'll probably find is, like with design, like with many practices, there are going to be people who are better at it and people who aren't as good at it, right? Combination of natural inclination and mindset and practice, like willingness to do the work. I don't think we will democratize product management in the same way that we have been able to democratize design, to use your language, right? I don't think, in the way that in a company, everyone is a designer to the degree to which they affect that user experience. They might not manage the user experience, right? But they can have an impact on the user experience. And everyone can learn enough basic design methods to kind of maybe do their work a little bit better. I don't think that will be as translatable from a product standpoint. I don't think the decision. Let me think here. Now you've got me spinning. But I don't think it will be a democratized process, right? You still, because the product manager ends up being, go back to this model, right? Basically, one of the things I'm arguing is the product manager is this director. That by its nature is not a democratized role, right? It's a leadership role. It's a decision-making role. And so not everybody can make that decision. You need to have someone in charge. But everyone can contribute to it through design practices to help inform whatever it is that this person is now making decisions about.
So can I come back to you with something?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm making shit up off the top of my head, so we're having a dialogue here.
That's two of us. So it's interesting your use of the word leadership and product management. Yet you put it in the realm of strategy. And to my thinking, leadership is a moral imperative. It's a social practice. It's about selling a vision and those things. However, strategy is an intellectual pursuit. So how do you break those things up?
I haven't approached the concept of leadership as you have, and I tend to think of strategy as a leadership skill. So in the book we wrote, the org design book we wrote, we talk about how designers, as they grow, it stops being about growing their core design skills and getting better and better at that, and adopting interpersonal and leadership skills. And within as a leadership skill, we identify vision setting, what you were saying, empathy and compassion as a leadership skill, swagger, kind of that owning the room and encouraging followers as a leadership skill, and strategy, being able to craft and articulate a strategy as a leadership skill. So I do more to connect the two. I hear what you're saying, and I just haven't thought hard enough about how I would distinguish between the kind of intellectual aspects of strategy development and the emotional, charismatic, compelling aspects of leadership. And you were kind of discussing it. There's something there. I don't want to noodle on it in front of everybody, but I like what you're saying, because I do think you can practice strategy without being a leader. But I'm wary of leaders who are not comfortable with strategy, I guess is what I'm saying. I want my leaders to understand the strategy of what it is they're leading, but I don't need my strategists to necessarily be good leaders. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay. Wow, that worked out. We had a dialogue. We got somewhere. Who else wants? Can we get somewhere?
You would, Brenda.
Okay.
She picks the other side of the room.
And she's wanting you to get your steps.
I got my steps in.
Thank you. Let's see if this doesn't come very confusing. A little bit confusing. I'll
You're
try.
among friends. We're all working our stuff out today.
Yeah, I'll probably also follow that. So if I may kind of interpret your, and I don't know if you might actually go back to your Venn diagram, but kind of as I see it from my own experience in different organizations, from like super small to very big, product managers are very tight, and especially agile teams, right? So business is not actually that attached to the product delivery. So teams have a product manager, tech team, developers, and a designer. Business is actually kind of in another level on the hierarchy. So what product managers do most, in my experience, is actually be the business engagers, so that the team doesn't start doing whatever crazy stuff artists might do, some designers. So if I just might like turn 3D your diagram and make it like a pyramid, I see that actually the
Next time we need to have a whiteboard for this.
yes, definitely. So because I see that if you turn it like that, it might become a pyramid, and that thing in the center is probably a hierarchy thing, and that might be the what I would love to see as like UX, not design, but UX vision of the product and or maybe a service. And then the things around would definitely be pretty close to what an agile team maybe is.
Right.
Product manager, designer on whatever the specifics the product needs, and developers. But then the product manager, if it's still the alignment of the business, then what we might need is actually not the product manager to be that person in the center, but in the center there might be someone that actually is more like, I see an HR person there, like a conflict resolution. That brings all these things together.
Okay.
That, yeah, I understand that you understand the customer, I understand that you understand the business, and I understand that you understand the box.
Right.
How do we put this together
Right.
and deliver whatever?
Right. I think I understood where you were going. So a couple thoughts. So tech companies, product and business tend to be the same person, right? Your product manager tends to be responsible for the business at a company like Atlassian or companies that I work for, like Groupon or whatever. There was an expectation that the product manager essentially was responsible not just for some set of abstract product metrics, but dollars. Right? There was a way to connect what they were doing to dollars. In other contexts, so I visited ANZ yesterday and had a few of them in my workshop last week. Right? So in a bank like that, you now have these banks that are building technical teams, software development teams, essentially, that have the 3 in a box of product design and engineering. And they are in turn in service to the business. This is, I think, kind of what you're talking about. So they'll have essentially an internal customer that is the consumer bank, or the commercial bank, or home loans, or whatever. And you're right, in that context, business and product have now become two distinct entities. So that's actually one of those challenges with talking about product management. You have to define what flavor in what context. Still in that mode, that product manager is, as you're saying, kind of responsible for interpreting the business requirements into the team. So they're still kind of representing business. So it's not wildly divorced. I don't know enough about the pyramid, kind of extruding from the screen here. Kind of imagine the scene in Videodrome with the hand pushing through. Any Cronenberg fans? Okay, a couple. Great. I'm not alone here. I found what you said about team, kind of that HR person almost, super compelling. And this is a bit of a thread, but something that we are terrible at as an industry is understanding how to build and enable and support teams of people working together. We just throw folks together who may have never worked together before and say, just go, figure it out, build shit. And that is not going to enable That is not how you enable a team to succeed intentionally. And there's a lot of value in organizational psychology and some of these practices being brought to bear to help a team figure out how it can work best together. And that's actually, Google came up in some coffee I was having with the ARC people before this meeting. Google's done some interesting research on teams and teaming and what leads to a successful team. And I would encourage everyone to read about Project Aristotle if they haven't. And it's pretty, I don't want to say it's a well understood, but there's a lot of good thinking about how teams work and how do you get these different voices who might have different value systems and different things that they bring to bear and not yell and argue at each other and instead work well together. But we often don't, like, to me, that is what, in an agile context, that's what an agile coach or a scrum master type should be doing. But they're often not. They're often kind of focused on the mechanics and not the dynamics. But those dynamics are going to be as important in determining success as anything else, if not more important. So I'm babbling back, but somewhere in between our babble, brilliance emerged. I hope you caught it. It was fleeting.
I'm very glad that we've got Rev doing the transcript of this because we're going to have like a 27-page manifesto at the end of it. I know that there's a couple more questions here, but I also know that you've been talking for well over an hour, and I think this is probably an awesome opportunity to say thank you very much, Peter. And